I thank you all for giving me this opportunity to be with you this evening. It's my first time back in Boston for about 3 years. I've been in India for 2.5 years. And circumstantially, I arrived in India in our world headquarters in Mayapur on March 8th, 2020. And for 3 weeks. And then somehow it seemed that my onward destination was closed very quickly, and I wasn't able to get to it, and everything else was closing up very quickly, so I decided just to stay in India for 2.5 years. And I just returned from there just a couple of months ago. And I stopped first in Europe. I went to Hungary in August, and I went to Ukraine. Some of you may be a little bit surprised that I was there, but I was in Ukraine for Janmashtami. I observed the Janmashtami celebration with many of our Vaishnavas who live in Ukraine, and I don't have to tell you what's been going on there. You probably know as well as I do, except the differences I saw it. And then I was also in Turkey, and returned to Hungary, and then I came here to America a few weeks ago. And in a couple of weeks I'll be going back to Ukraine, and then I'll be going to India. So it's been 3 years since I've been here. And always very happy to come to Boston, as was introduced before I began chanting. I joined here in a temple. It was a different temple. It was on North Beacon Street in Allston, Massachusetts. We had a small temple there, which was previously a funeral parlor. And we converted it to a temple. And it was there that their Lordship Shri Radha Gopi Vallabha, the predominating deities here in Boston, were installed, and worship began there in 1971. And I started to come and visit the temple in 1972. And previous to that, I was a college student in Massachusetts. So I have something in common, I guess, with a lot of you. I was an engineering major at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. And I studied there for a couple of years, but I didn't complete my education. But in fact, I didn't even stay an engineering major. I think a lot of you probably have a lot more determination for these topics than I did in 1970. I switched to liberal arts and became a music major. And that was in 1970, and at the University of Massachusetts. But I'm very familiar with all of the universities here in Boston. I know all the universities because later, when I was the temple president, I think it was mentioned here, when I was the temple president, I used to lecture in practically every one of the universities. Boston University, Northeastern, Harvard, MIT, Brandeis, many colleges here. The professors used to invite me to come and to speak to their students, and I had a different purpose at that time for going to college. At that time I was going to college to speak the message of Sanatana Dharma to the students. And in fact, there was one professor at Brandeis who used to invite me regularly to come to speak, although I was not a college graduate. He used to invite me to come, and he leave for the day when he turned all his classes over to me. And he asked me to take all his classes, and I put my name up on the board, Naranjana Das. And I said, I'm your teacher for today, and I've come to speak about Sanatan Dharma. And my professor gave me full facility to introduce the message of Krishna consciousness to many of the students. And so I'm well acquainted. Most of you, should I suspect that most of you are from MIT? No? Where are you from? Where? Northeastern. Well, all from Northeastern? Oh, all from Northeastern. Oh, that's a big surprise. My sister is alumni from Northeastern University. And I didn't, as I said, I went to the University of Massachusetts. Northeastern, so what are you majoring in? What? Some of the exam. Robotics, right. Isn't Boston famous for robotics? Yeah, I always see the animated robots moving around on YouTube. I guess famous for this. Isn't there something of Boston robotics or something like that? Yeah. Robotics. Any engineering majors here? Computer science, of course, computer science. I think I should have known. Actually, when I went to college, it was Fortran. I used to go to sit in front of the terminal and put a little card in and register for the big mainframe computers. It's a little bit different than it is right now, but at least I can say I've had some of a different time. We're talking about over 50 years ago, but I had similar experiences to many of you. But of course I see that most of you have come probably from India and attracted for the colleges in Boston. It's well known for its computer sciences. And that's why I thought maybe many of you were at MIT. I'm surprised to hear Northeastern. Anyways, I'm not coming to speak about that tonight, so I hope I don't disappoint you. As I said, I dropped out of engineering in it's probably my second month when I became a music major, and then a minor in psychology. And shortly after that, I began visiting our temple in Alston, and at some point in time, I decided to move in and become a brahmachari, and living a monastic life, which is probably not something many of you are aspiring for. But at the same time, it has its value, it had its virtue, especially for that particular time in my life. It really gave me some insight as to what I felt. I had a certain calling, and my spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, I met him. As also mentioned, I met him in 1972. First, my meeting with him was, sometimes people ask, when did you first meet Srila Prabhupada? He's the founder of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And my immediate response is usually, I met him in 1972, and they ask me where did I meet him? And I tell them I met him in a bookstore. And then they ask me, what was he doing in a bookstore? And my response surprises some of them by telling them that he was sitting on a shelf. That was my first meeting with Srila Prabhupada. I walked into a bookstore. I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time. Famous bookstore called Brentano's, I think it was. And I got Bhagavad Gita, which was sitting on a bookshelf there because I was looking for a book on yoga. And when I opened it up, I saw a picture of a yogi sitting in deep meditation, and he was moving up through the different chakras of the body and coming out from the head of the body, and then on top was Radha and Krishna. And I said, this really looks like a good book on yoga. And that's what That was my first introduction to Krishna consciousness, was from coming in contact with Srila Prabhupada in his Bhagavad Gita. And then later, I was initiated by him in 1974, and the first time I actually saw him was in 1975, when I met him in the LaGuardia airport in New York, when he was coming to America for part of his American tour. Anyways, I felt that was my calling. I had some difficulties with my family. In fact, I was just with my sister today. She remembers a lot of those. She was pulling out some letters, and she pulled out a letter from her stack of letters, and she said, "You want to see any of these letters?" And I pulled out, there was a letter I wrote in 1973, and I was telling my family I decided to become a monk. I've moved into an ashram, and if you would like to come and visit me, here's my address, here's my phone number. And it was a bit of a shock to them, because they had different plans for me. I'm sure some of you can relate to that too, your parents having certain plans, and you certainly want to fulfill them. And it took a little while to get my parents' forgiveness, but they actually came to accept my way of life and learned to respect me, because they saw that so many things changed. And they knew me as a 16, 17, 18-year-old hippie, long hair, and I was here. Certainly I grew up in the 60s in that culture, and it took them a while to come to accept that I was giving those things up, and they couldn't figure out why. In fact, my mother, when she found out I was living in the temple, she came to the temple and she asked me, "Don't you want to go back and do those things again?" That was the first thing she asked me. And I said no. And yes?
Invite devotees to move forward a little bit.
I'm supposed to invite devotees to move forward, because maybe there's somebody who is sitting in
There's
back.
a lot of students waiting in the hall also, so if we can, nice and tight in here.
Please do not leave spaces in between. Please occupy all the spaces. You can please keep your backs on your laps if possible. Sorry for any inconvenience. But please do not leave like spaces if there is. Please don't leave any spaces. There are many of your friends waiting outside to just get in.
I can tell you, just to make you feel a little bit better, I used to visit the Soviet Union during the communist times, and during those times we had to meet clandestinely to discuss Krishna consciousness, and sometimes in small apartments or sometimes in the forest. And we used to pack about maybe half of this amount in a small little flat, and it was much tighter. And we would sit for 6 hours, so don't feel bad. You should be quite comfortable in comparison to what these persons were experiencing back in the 1980s when I was going to the Soviet Union at that time. I wanted to speak a little bit. I'm not going to speak about myself. Forgive me, I thought maybe sometimes I do this because I remember as as a guest lecturer, guest speaker, I used to go to the colleges and lecture a lot in auditoriums to large numbers of students, sometimes 300, 400 students with the professors there. And I'll give you an example of what kind of a response sometimes I would get from the students when I would go in and give a lecture. It was quite frequent. Students would come up, and here's one. After the lecture, and she said, "You know, I never realized that Hare Krishnas were people. You're people." Because sometimes when people look at us, especially this is, of course, back in the 70s, 80s, our spiritual master used to tell us that in the beginning of our movement, it would be ridiculed, and then it would be persecuted, and then it would be accepted. So in the early years, people weren't accustomed to seeing people with shaved heads, wearing robes, why are you wearing bed sheets? And so people had this certain concept of us as being otherworldly. So when I come in and talk to the students and kind of speak a little bit about at least basic, simple things, people would come to realize that. I had another girl come up to me once. It was the University of Central Connecticut in a large auditorium of students. She just ran up to me and she said, "You're the kind of guy I'd bring home to introduce to my parents." It was sort of like try to get rid of the air of mystical air of like we're renounced monks and we're just impersonalists. We can't relate to people and do strange things. But no, actually, it's helpful to know that we're people. And you'll find when you associate with devotees that most of them are people. Believe it or not. And they have a history, they have a background, and they have a reason for taking up the path of Krishna consciousness. For me, my reason was my meeting with my spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada. I was very much overwhelmed by his example. And I wanted to speak a little bit about example tonight because the topic that I just touch upon, because I certainly can't go into in depth tonight, is coming up soon, is Diwali. And I'm sure all of you are familiar with Diwali. Of course, Diwali is a time when there's fireworks and celebrations. And we know that Diwali has a deeper meaning than just simply lighting fireworks and just simply, coming from darkness to light. But Diwali is actually, we should understand a little bit about who is Ram, Lord Ramachandra, because without knowing a little bit about Ramachandra, what is Diwali? Because Diwali is when Lord Ramachandra is returning from 14 years of exile, is returning to Ayodhya, and they're greeting him. The path was with lights, and he's coming to Ayodhya to take up his position to his king of Ayodhya. And certainly one of the characteristics of Lord Ram was that he came to teach what is an ideal king, and by his example, he had so many ideal qualities that he embodied that became very, very much attractive to the citizens of Ayodhya. So much so that he was, became very dear to him, and because under the influence of Ram Raj, under the influence of his example and teachings, he was it's described in the Ramayana that there was nobody had to experience disease, old age, suffering, and people didn't even have to die if they didn't want to. I mean, it was because sacrifice was performed, and he was so dear to the citizens that everybody was willing to execute their prescribed duties for the performance of sacrifice for the pleasure of the Lord. And as I said, example was something that was taught by Lord Ramachandra. It was the example of an ideal king. I saw in my spiritual master an ideal example, and that's what attracted me to want to give up my pursuits and to live a different way of life, because I saw here's a person who actually embodied many similar qualities that Lord Ramachandra himself spoke about in his teachings to the citizens of Ayodhya. Not only did he speak about them, but he embodied them. In fact, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Yad Yad Acharati Shreshtashtha Eve Turojana Sayat Pranam Kurute Lokastanuvartate, that whatever actions are performed by great men, then common men will follow in his footsteps, and whatever his standards he sets by his exemplary acts, all the world pursues. So, we need to see examples. And without examples, it's very hard to have the inspiration and hope that there is a way of life that we can live that's wholesome, satisfying, nourishing to the soul, meaningful to the self, and not just a life which is devoid of spirituality. And Srila Prabhupada in me, although certainly he was not an avatar in the sense that he, as Lord Ramachandra came to teach by his example, but he was an acharya. An acharya is somebody who comes to teach by his example. And he manifested his qualities of compassion, kindness, simplicity, purity, and to see these qualities manifest in one person is astounding, because what it does is when you see that here's somebody whose mind is peaceful, let's face it, these days it's not so easy to actually be peaceful. And in fact, Krishna explains this in Bhagavad Gita, what the real peace formula is. Bhoktaram jagat tapasam savaloka maheshwaram. The real peace formula is to know that Krishna is the Supreme Lord of all sacrifices and austerities, is the Lord of all sentient beings. And those who worship Him, they can genuinely become peaceful. They have confidence and faith in His presence in their life. Just as Lord Ramachandra taught by his example, how the people of Ayodhya could be completely confident of their protection. They felt very protected by him, but he had certain qualities that was so attractive. And I wanted to read just a little bit about his qualities, because the reason why he was so respected, worshipped, adored, and followed is because of his attractive qualities. And in the Ramayana, in the Ayodhya Kanda, there is a very detailed description. I don't have time to speak of them all. I'm only going to speak of a few of them. But they describe what was some of the virtues of Lord Ramachandra. What was it that made him so attractive, exemplary? And of course we should understand, when we speak about Lord Ramachandra, I mean, I could go a lot into detail who he is, why he appears, why he descends in this world. The Lord appears in various forms. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, it is stated, Ete Chang Sakala Pungsam Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam, that the Lord appears in various forms to protect the devotees. But Krishna is described as the original Supreme Lord, from whom all other manifestations are coming. And Lord Ramachandra is one of his personal forms. He takes his birth in this world. His parents were Dasarath, who was a great saintly king. He came here because it was at a time when it was definitely necessary to protect Brahminical culture, to protect saintly persons, especially because of Ravana, which I'm sure many of you are aware of, who Ravana was and what he did, and the distresses and disturbances he created. It was understood that everyone wanted a person who could appear to deal with this sinful Ravana who is causing so much disturbance. So he appeared, Lord Ramachandra appeared as an ordinary human being. And although he was the Supreme Lord, he accepted the role as an ordinary human being to teach in the ways we spoke about. So I wanted to speak a little bit about his virtues, as I said, which are mentioned in Ayodhya Kanda. And this is, he had an unfailing serenity of mind. Ram never paid back harshness with harshness. This is a virtue, I think, which is very important to learn from an exemplary teacher. Somebody who doesn't pay back harshness with harshness. In fact, it makes me think of a verse. There's a verse in Srimad Bhagavatam. I oftentimes quote this. Anybody know who Parikshit Maharaj is? Parikshit? Can you raise your hand if you know Parikshit Maharaj? Parikshit. Yes, you know Parikshit. Parikshit. You know? Yes, a few of you know who Parikshit is. Okay. He was a great king. He was cursed by a young Brahmin boy, Shringi. Parikshit Maharaj was an ideal king, also an ideal example. And then one sage, Shamika Rishi, came, Parikshit Maharaj came to the hermitage of the sage, and the sage did not greet him properly, and Parikshit Maharaj took a snake and garlanded it around his neck to try to teach him a lesson. Actually, the reason why he did that is because ultimately the Srimad Bhagavatam would be spoken to Parikshit Maharaj, who was cursed by the son of Shamik Rishi to die in 7 days by this bite of a snake bird. So Parikshit Maharaj was a great saintly king, and one of his qualities, which was recognized in him, was described Taraskrita Vipralabda Kshatakshita Hatahapi Nasyatat Patikurvanti Tad Bhakta Kavayopihi. The devotees of the Lord are so forbearing that even if they're cheated, even if they're cursed, even if they're neglected, even if they're disturbed, even if they're insulted, or even if they're killed, they're never inclined to avenge themselves. Well, someone say, well, a person who's killed, how's he going to avenge himself? I hope all of you can address that. You must understand about the eternality of the soul. That the basic teaching of Bhagavad Gita, Jayate Riyate Vakatachin, that the soul is never born nor does it die. It's eternal, ever existing, not slain when the body is slain. This is Krishna's elementary instruction to Arjuna about the nature of the soul. It doesn't die. And Krishna tells Arjuna that Dehi no sminyata dehi komaram jovaram jura, that the soul passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age. And similarly, the soul passes into another body at the time of death. Dhiras tatra namuyati, one who's dhira, one who's self-realized. He's not bewildered by the change of dress. Just as a person takes off old clothes and puts on new clothes, in the same way the soul gets rid of his old body and takes on a new body. So it's quite possible for a person who has been killed to come back and avenge himself. And there are examples of it even in the Srimad Bhagavatam. But Vaishnavas, that even if they're disturbed or insulted, how many of us can deal with being insulted and just, most of us will think about getting back. How long can you tolerate being insulted and then without thinking about how can I have to do something, how can I live with being insulted? Well, I need to get back. Right? Disturbed, neglected, how many of us can tolerate being neglected? But here, Pariksha Maharaj, he was such a Vaishnava that they're so forbearing that even if they're neglected, disturbed, insulted, or even killed, they're never inclined to take revenge. Why? Why? This is same thing that's described of Ram. He never paid back harshness with harshness. He was tolerant, forbearing. He was always accepting. He was always very humble and simple. Sometimes he would look down when spoken about highly. He would never even think that these words are about me. He was so humble, never thinking himself to be qualified. These are attractive qualities. And when you see that in a person, you think that I'd like to become like that because I get disturbed. It's easy to become disturbed. It's one of the symptoms of this age. It's praying by yourself. Sabya kalavasmin yugejana manda sumanda matayo matabadi hubajata. In the age of Kali, men are quarrelsome, they're lazy, misguided, they live short lives, unlucky, and above all, always disturbed. Isn't that a fact? It's so easy to get agitated and disturbed by the slightest provocation. That's Kali. Kali means the slightest provocation will create a disturbance. And that is what's happened in the current age. People are so wired that the slight provocation will think that, I need to get back. Well, let's face it, wars are born of this mentality. I saw it. I saw it myself. And as I described, I visited the place and I've seen what the kind of response and reaction there'll be. That fighting between two parties, nations, individuals. Unfortunately, in this age, fighting is even between husband and wife. Slight provocation. Why? Because disturbed. And people have to go sometimes for therapy. How do I actually learn how to deal with disturbance? And they learn various methods and treatments, how to deal with a disturbed mind. But when we associate with people who are not disturbed by any provocation, who can show, then what happens is we can begin to learn from them how to live a life without becoming disturbed. Our spiritual masters taught this by his example, Srila Prabhupada. Lord Ramachandra taught it to all the citizens of Ayodhya, because that's what he came to teach. One of the many things he came to teach. And therefore he describes that one of his virtues is he never paid back harshness with harshness. He was tolerant. Krishna says, Matraspashastu konti asitoshna sukudukada agamapaino nishtangti tikshasu bharata. He says the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress and their disappearance in due course are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, and one has to tolerate them without being disturbed. How many of us can tolerate? It's not so easy to tolerate. But we can learn it when we learn the real peace formula, how to be tolerant, how to tolerate others, how to tolerate differences between people, how to tolerate words that disturb my mind. How many times did somebody say something in a joking way and we take it so seriously and feel offended by it, and then we become so disturbed by it. How could he say such a thing about me? I don't deserve that. And we become disturbed. It's due to false identification of the self. And an ideal spiritual leader teaches us who is the self, Who is the self? The self, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, he cannot be cut by a sword, moistened by water, withered by the wind. He's not affected by any of these external disturbances. He is an eternal spiritual being, and his eternal identity is that as a servant of Krishna. And when one actually understands that I'm actually more than just a student, I'm more than just an Indian, I'm more than just an American, I'm more than just so many designations. Because it's these designations which is the cause of so much conflict. I'm more. There is an eternal identity within that who am I? And I share a commonality with everyone else. I can tolerate others because I share a commonality with everyone else. I was supposed to stop at 8 o'clock. And I think that little sound there was a sort of like a reminder. Although probably not intentional because it's artik. But the artik means it's an opportunity to see Shishi Radha Gopi Ballabha. And I haven't seen them for 3 years and I don't want to miss them. I want that curtain to open. So I'm going to stop here. Thank you for tolerating me. And thank you for coming. I hope that it says something relevant to all of you. And if you want to learn more, then hopefully you'll find examples amongst the devotee community of others who can teach, not only by their words, but by their example. We need examples to become inspired. So thank you very much for coming this evening. And there's a lot more I could say, but I'm waiting to see Radha Gopta Vallabha. Hare Krishna.
They're requesting if we can sing Damodarastakam. They have the lamps and everything ready for the students.
Damodarastakam.
Yeah. Do you need water?
No, but I'd like to turn so I can see the deities. So if you put the table over here.
Also express our gratitude to His Holiness Maharaj. Now, Maharaj will be singing Damodarastakam. So we will be offering lamps. So we have people now. And after some time, gradually we will provide gifts to you so that you can offer lamps to the Lord. Hare Krishna.
Who's going to play Badanga and Kartals? In Dotal? Okay. Please don't play fast. Please play as I am playing. Okay? Namamisvaram Sachit Ananda Rupam Lasakundalam Gokule Brajamana Namamisvaram Sachit Ananda Rupam Not going to be lamps? Yasodaviyodukaladavamana Paramistamachyan Tatodukya Tantam Mupunitra Yumamijantam Karamurchayubena Satankamitra Swasakam Pachire Kankakanta Stita Gaivam Damodaram Bhaktivada Itijik Swalinamhe Ananda Kunde Swagoshonimajantam Akyapayantam Tadiyeshita Geshu Bhaktajitatva Punape Mutastam Sutavritti Vande Tiyeshita Geshu Padam Deva Moksham Namokshavademva Nachanyam Praneham Varishadaviha Idam Teva Purnata Gopalavada Sadame Manasya Nirastam Idam Te Mukam Bojam Atyanta Nilaya Vitam Kunta Daisnigda Raktaishagopya Daisnigda Raktaishagopya Muhustram Vitam Bimba Raktadarame Manasya Virasta Alam Lakshalabhai Namo Deva Damodarananta Vishnu Prasida
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare. Oh.